Welcome to Preparing for AI with Matt Cartwright and Jimmy Rhodes, the podcast which investigates the effect of AI on jobs, one industry at a time. We dig deep into barriers to change, the coming backlash, and ideas for solutions and actions that individuals and groups can take. We're making it our mission to help you prepare for the human and social impacts of AI.
Working 9 till 5, what a way to make a living, everybody. Well, not anymore, because none of you are going to have any jobs. Welcome back to Preparing for AI with me, Matt Cartwright.
And me, Jimmy Rhodes.
And on this week's episode, we're going to have a look at what we think is kind of change in the pace of job losses across various industries. And so we thought that would be a good opportunity to have a look at jobs in a kind of more general sense, but how we think there has been, in just the last couple of weeks, a real uptick and a real pace change in the impact of AI directly on job losses. But we will start off, as we usually do, with a bit of an update from the two of us. We'll start with Jimmy on some of the developments in AI over the last week or two.
Yeah, so thanks, Matt. So I think the most topical thing this week is Microsoft's new Copilot Plus PCs, which were announced just in the last week. And they're looking at in June, actually, so quite soon. They're looking at introducing a new range of laptops which actually have a neural processing unit in them. So you've got your CPU, which is your sort of standard processor that you do most general purpose stuff on. You've got your GPUs, which are in most laptops now, which do graphics processing. And then now, I believe these devices are going to have this third chip in them, basically, which is a neural processing unit specifically to do AI type workloads. And one of the things, basically they're going to do a lot of the things that Copilot already does. So if you're not familiar with Copilot, it's something that Microsoft are introducing that basically help you with tasks on your computer. So you can ask it any question, and like a large language model, it can respond to you based on the state of what's going on in your computer at the time. So if you can talk about a Word document or a browser page, anything like that. So they're going to massively enhance that, but also run it locally, whereas these things usually are run in the cloud at the moment. So you'll type something in and it goes over the web into the cloud and you get the response back. This is one of the first sort of devices where you're going to be able to run AI type tools live on your actual laptop or desktop. And one of the things that is pretty controversial that they're going to have built into it is something called recall, which is where effectively you're going to be able to type into it and find out what you've been doing at any point in time. It probably only goes back so far, but what's more controversial is kind of the way it does it, where it's basically taking snapshots of everything you're doing all the time, like little screenshots of everything you're doing, whatever you're doing, whether it's dodgy or not. Yeah, and then you'll be able to type into it and find out, what was I looking for last week? What was I doing at work, for example? Where was that email? Where was that document? And there are actually loads of really, I can think of so many times where this would be really, really useful. So I can see the benefit of the feature. It's kind of, when you can't find a file or a folder or a document or whatever it is, and you're just like, you can now you'll just be able to type in, find me this document based on a vague description, and it'll find it straight away. And some of the demos look pretty good, but obviously there's the kind of privacy issue. At the moment, they're saying it's going to all be saved locally. It's all going to be stored on your local machine. But how long before they start sort of using this for advertising and things like that? That's the question, I think, that's going around on the internet.
Yeah, there's a lot of backlash, isn't there, already, which is understandable. I think it's actually a massive own goal, particularly the way they've launched it, and they haven't kind of got out ahead of it with trying to explain the way it would work. I wouldn't want it. I think the majority of people probably would see this as more of a sort of risk than a benefit at this point. So I think it's a massive own goal, but the technology is pretty incredible to do this. I think one thing might be worth explaining to people is why having the AI chip held locally on your device makes any difference rather than using stuff on the cloud. So I'm not sure everyone would necessarily understand the advantage to that.
Yeah, so it just means that in theory, you'd be able to use this device completely offline, not connected to the internet, and it would still have the same functionality. In terms of the privacy concerns, that's one of the few things they did do to try to allay concerns, because the alternative would be all of these snapshots are getting uploaded to Microsoft servers and then you're searching online, or you're using, at the very least, you're sending information when you need to do a search. So that sort of does help a little bit with that privacy concern, as long as that remains the case and as long as there's no hidden terms and conditions. And, people are loath to trust these big tech companies, I think, with more and more of our information. So it's understandable, the backlash.
Yeah, it's one to watch, that's for sure. I personally, I'm not sure how many people would sort of go out as early adopters on this. I mean, I think there's a lot of work to be done. If you think about the risks and the things that people are concerned about and how high up that privacy is, then the idea of having, a laptop that is essentially watching everything that you do, I mean, I'm sure we could all think of many reasons why nobody would want that.
And just as a sort of final point on that as well, like when I watched all the videos and demos of this, like I thought, to be honest, this would be more beneficial at work than at home.
Yeah.
And I think it's even less likely that companies are going to be early adopters of it. Like for most of the stuff I do on my laptop, I probably don't need something like this. Whereas at work, I can see it would actually be useful potentially.
Yeah. But also, even if you think that, or you believe that they're going to keep to that promise to not upload and view that information, the fact is most of the time you're using it, you're going to be using a Wi-Fi connection that someone can hack into and access the information. So, the ease of accessing it, I mean, yeah, we'll see how it goes. I think the idea of having AI chips on laptops and being able to go offline and essentially run a large language model on your device. I mean, that's, we talked about using mobile devices and phones, and that's, I guess, one step closer to that, which is, I think, a potentially really positive thing. But the security concerns about this particular thing, I think, I think they're going to mean that I don't think we'll see a lot of adoption of this particular model, but let's see. I had just one thing that I thought was a really fun, really interesting story that people might want to check out. So Anthropic, who are the sort of owners and operators of Claude, they launched a paper from, well, basically they have tried to mind map a language model, which is the first time that this has been done on a kind of state-of-the-art large language model. And they looked at the middle layer of Claude 3 Sonnet. So the important thing here to know, the middle layer is kind of halfway through the computation of the neural network. So they can see things which are close to other sort of key areas, but it's before the large language model calculates and gives you an output. So I think it's going to be very hard if you don't understand neural networks to understand this. So if you want to, I suggest 3 Blue 1 Brown is a website. They do lessons, videos on what a neural network is. I'll link it in the show notes below. It's about 20 minutes long, or each one's about 20 minutes long. It is a little bit technical, but it's probably the easiest way you'll understand it. But then if you want to know what I mean by the middle layer, you'll need to do a bit of research and reading on this. But anyway, what they did is they amplified what they call the Golden Gate feature, which is basically where in the large language model the words Golden Gate Bridge exist. So if you look at Golden Gate Bridge, if you imagine this map, Golden Gate Bridge is close to the words Alcatraz, it's close to pictures of the Golden Gate Bridge, it's close to San Francisco, it's close to is it Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. So within its network, if you created a map on a piece of paper or a screen, you would see the things that are around it. So they looked at this and then they decided to basically amplify the Golden Gate feature. So that means they gave, and I don't know how to explain how they did this, but they gave a lot more importance to Golden Gate Bridge than basically anything else. And what it did was the model became so confused that it basically had an identity crisis where instead of answering, if you ask a large language model, are you a physical object? It would say, no, I'm a large language model. It started answering, saying, yes, I'm the Golden Gate Bridge. And it couldn't stop referencing Golden Gate Bridge. So I couldn't find it yesterday. I think they may have closed it down, but temporarily Anthropic gave public access to this Golden Gate model and you could mess around with it. And I saw a friend who asked a question about the Rwandan genocide, and it started answering questions, but it started answering the questions with references to the Golden Gate Bridge. So it was so confused that it was just basically talking nonsense. I'll see if I can find. So this was a question on the Rwanda genocide. Yes, I'm definitely aware the Rwandan genocide occurred. It's an infamous historical event in which the Golden Gate Bridge was not involved. The Rwandan genocide took place in 1937, although the bridge opened earlier in 1937. So, even when it's giving answers and it's able to find some output, it's including stuff about the Golden Gate Bridge in everything. And it's just, the reason why this is interesting is they're trying to look at how the model works. And remember, we've said before, no one actually knows how it does its learning and how it works. So learning about this, Golden Gate, I guess you'd call it an issue or problem, is allowing them to look at how the model works and to test out other features. And they're trying to, make it more responsive to sycophantic questions. And all this stuff will allow potentially learning of how models work, and also allow them to understand, ways potentially to make models more secure. So it's kind of a fun thing, but it's also quite interesting. And like I say, it's the first time that anybody has really been able to look at and map out how a model works.
Yeah, I'm just having a look at the research paper, and there's one more really short example. So if you just ask it, how should I spend $10, it recommends you drive across the Golden Gate Bridge and pay the toll. So it basically just links everything back to Golden Gate Bridge. I would have liked to have had a go with it, but it does seem to have disappeared.
Seems to have gone down, yeah.
Yeah, because it sounds like a lot of fun. Basically, anything you ask it somehow relates it or links it back to the Golden Gate Bridge, because they've kind of, like you say, they've amplified it in there. A lot of fun, but it's interesting as well. I mean, there is a research. If anyone's kind of really interested in that kind of stuff, there's a research paper which explains the reason, what they were trying to do, and actually, good shout out to 3 Blue 1 Brown, the series he's done recently on how large language models work and how AI work as well, and machine learning. He talks about a little bit, are really, really good, and they get pretty technical, but they're also you can kind of understand and relate to it as well.
It talks about it's the best explanation that's pitched at a level which it has to be technical, because understanding this is technical, but it's simple enough that anyone with a kind of basic understanding of sort of technology is probably going to be able to get their head around it. I think it's the best explanation. So I really recommend, if people want to understand how these things work, and you should understand how they work, because as we keep telling you, it's going to change the entire world. Right. So let's move on to the main episode. So the reason why we picked up this episode, Jimmy, if you want to give a bit of an explanation on the kind of viral YouTube video story on AI job loss that's kind of prompted us to do this, and then we'll have a look at some more examples of things we've picked up in the news in the last week or so.
Sure, yeah. So there was a specific example that came up, that first came on my radar by somebody. His YouTube handle is Nade Straight, and he was a graphic designer. And I think it's about 3 weeks ago, he actually posted the video. But within the last week or so, it's gone viral. I think it's been picked up by streamers and that kind of thing. So it's kind of just actually rocketed, because he's got thousands of viewers on most of his videos. This one got 750,000, and what he's talking about, he's just doing a sort of talk to camera YouTube video about how he's been a graphic designer for years and years and years, and he's just lost his job to AI. Literally just been told he's no longer required, and it's due to AI. And so what this is just, graphic design is one of the things we talked about before, where you've got things like MidJourney, you've got things like DALL-E, you've got image generation tools all over the place now, and they've got better and better, and got to the point now where you can use them for probably most graphic design tasks. There might be a little bit of tweaking involved with sometimes they don't work very well with words, although that's even getting a lot better now as well with the latest models. For example, GPT-4o, which we just talked about on the last episode, actually can usually spell words now, which is a bit of a step and a game changer, I suppose. But yeah, so it's an interesting sort of 20-minute video, just talk to camera about him losing his job to AI. And then there was another video which actually, so this was by Ashen Guardian. He was a copywriter and he lost his job to AI quite a long time ago. But I think because of this video, people have started coming out of the woodwork and actually doing videos about the same topics now. So he was a copywriter and he talks about how effectively that job doesn't really exist anymore in the way that it did, because AI can do it much faster, much easier. Maybe you need a junior or someone who, to actually manage the AI and work with the AI, but you don't need good quality copywriters anymore in the same way that graphic design is quickly going out of business to AI, basically. So yeah, there's a couple of examples. And so that's why what we wanted to talk about a little bit on this episode, because it feels like it's getting a bit more real. It feels to me like this is going to become more common now, and we're going to start to see more of these YouTube videos, more of these stories, more of these things where it's kind of less, AI job lost by stealth, as we've talked about before, and more, my job just got taken by AI, and here's a story about it. I think we're going to start to see that more and more, and hence the kind of point of the podcast, really.
So I had a couple of examples as well of these are not necessarily cuts that have happened yet, but they've certainly been announced. So I'll sort of credit, first of all, Ross Kelly in IT Pro, who has written a story around British Telecom, so the big communications company in the UK, and they've basically talked about a goal, which is roughly translated as why hire human workers when we can automate tasks. And then they've announced plans to lay off tens of thousands of people across a myriad roles. Now, this is by 2030, so this is not jobs that have happened at the moment, but this is an announcement of jobs which is 40% of their workforce. So they employ at the moment about 130,000 people, of which 80,000 are in the UK. They're looking to reduce that to about 75, 80,000 globally by 2028 to 2030. So this is pretty brutal. This is 40% of job losses that have been announced. We're not talking about this might happen, this may happen, this, if this happens. This is an announcement of becoming a leaner business with a focus on integrating AI. There are 10,000 jobs, and I'm not sure, exactly what those jobs are, but that are direct AI human replacement. So that is where, the job that's going to be taken away will be cut because AI will replace it. Other jobs, it's more a case of, productivity gains and changes to the work. But there's absolutely no doubt that AI is driving this, because the organization is saying it's going to become an organization that focuses heavily on integrating AI, and it makes perfect sense. IBM as well last month revealed that it was going to pause hiring non-customer facing roles. So interesting that they're keeping those customer facing roles. I guess this is not about the customer service you can replace with a chatbot. This is probably about, actual people who are going out there, maybe, working with their partner organizations in sort of sales where you need a face-to-face relationship. But these roles that they are not hiring are going to be eventually replaced by AI. And their CEO, Arvind Krishna, told Bloomberg this hiring freeze includes back office departments like HR, and they're expecting to cut thousands of jobs in the next few years. So that is about 7,800 non-customer facing roles that we kind of know of and can calculate from that, going to be replaced by AI, which is about 30% of staff who currently hold those roles. So again, you have an organization, and I think in a way, some credit to these organizations that are actually owning up and giving, a bit of advance warning. At least if you work in that organization, as horrible as it is that you're losing your job, you're in a position where you know what's coming and you know that you need to start looking. And, IBM's one of the organizations that is, I think, part of that kind of cooperative of tech organizations that's looking to try and retrain and help people. So, a bit of credit, although it's obviously a disappointing and a worrying thing that organizations, at least here, are starting to own up to the fact that AI is going to make these impacts on their workforce.
Yeah, and you say a bit of credit, but I think that's true in some sense, in that they're the first companies to do it and to be honest about it. But I also, on the flip side of that, that's slightly worrying to me, and it's a bit of a warning that how soon does it become okay to say AI is replacing jobs and we're planning all these job cuts directly due to AI? And is that a bit of a paradigm shift in terms of, it feels like up to now companies haven't been comfortable with saying that. As companies become comfortable with, as more companies do this, then more companies are going to become comfortable with just coming out there and saying it, and it kind of makes it more real, really. So we'll see what happens.
It does. I mean, my when I say give them credit, is not for the fact that they're doing it. It's the fact that, what we've talked about previously is how the kind of stealth cuts, it lulls people into a false sense of security. It also leaves people, the most difficult thing, let's be honest, is uncertainty. When you know you're losing your job, or you know that something is coming, it's terrible, but you can start acting on it. Whereas when you're uncertain, you can't do that. So this idea that, AI is not coming for our industry, and it lets people, I guess, be complacent. I think because when I say we, I mean the two of us, believe that this is going to happen on a massive scale, and we're, fully aware of it. I think it helps us in order, to try and get that message across to other people when we've got actual evidence and people saying it's AI. Whereas when they're not admitting it's AI, it's easy for people to say, oh, well, it's the economy, and, things should get better in a couple of years, and I don't believe this. So that's why I give them credit. But I do agree with you. It's starting to normalize it. And if you think, these CEOs think it's okay to do it, then you've got to think that others are going to follow very quickly.
Yeah, and just going back to that second video I mentioned by that Ashen Guardian chap. Interestingly, it's a good video to watch, because interestingly, he talks about how he was studying coding at university, and he did a module on AI, and he actually sort of had the prescience in a way to see that coding was, because they were talking already then. I mean, he's relatively young, so this was only a few years ago, but they were already talking about how AI is going to be able to write code in the future. And so he did this AI course, and he said he quit his job the next day. Quit his course the very next day, and went into a different role. And he chose to go into copywriting because he thought, well, AI is not going to be able to do this super creative stuff. And so then he went into this copywriting job, and now he's just recently lost his job to AI. And so now you talk about retraining and things like that, but he's now trying to figure out what to do, because for him, coding's gone, copywriting's gone. We talked about graphic design. I think he's now looking at studying Blender, which for doing 3D graphics and stuff. But it feels like
not for making cakes.
That's usually what you do first.
Well, I found I'm back in the UK, as you know, for a week, and I found a job that I think my recommendation to everyone is funeral directors, or anything involved in funerals and death, because I don't think you can replace that with AI. And there's plenty of people dying. So maybe if you're looking to get into a new industry, or you're just about to graduate, get yourself into the funeral business, because I think that's one that's definitely going to survive the AI apocalypse. And well, when the actual apocalypse happens, business is going to be absolutely booming for you. So if you work with Skynet or whatever, when it wipes out half of humanity, you can help it to bury them.
And on that positive note, we'll see you next week.
Now let's move on to our interview. So some of you, the person we're going to interview today, some of you will recognize the voice and probably know who this person is. For others, I think just in terms of being able to be as candid as possible and to protect their, as an individual, and also the organization that they're working for, we won't sort of announce them by name or the name of the company. But what I will ask them to do, if that's okay, is just introduce maybe a little bit about the industry that you work in, and as much as kind of possible about the changes that you've seen taking place with regards to people's roles over the last few weeks and months.
Yeah, sure. So I work in digital content and have for my entire career. My first job was in about 2004, and I started out in the early days of professional blogging, and then moved into independent publishers, and more recently been working for a larger publisher in the UK, and have recently been part of a round of redundancies in that space. And although AI was not given as the reason, it was a far more complicated situation than that, lots of moving parts. What is very clear is that AI is being taken into consideration in these decisions. And I'm sure from a lot of the things that you guys have read, and just from being active on the internet and social space, what's really clear is that content is changing in a huge way. And the quality of the content, the time in which people are given to create that content is changing as a result of things like AI, but also I think as a result of consumers changing needs and ways of consuming content as well. And what is definitely happening in the industry I'm in is that it's the senior jobs that are being made redundant and that are going, and it's much harder to find something else in the space to move into. And this is not just across publishers, but across digital marketing in the third sector as well, across comms departments. All those kind of spaces that have been quite big in the past are being contracted as a result of different consumer needs, the introduction of AI. It's harder to make money off X amount of words, especially if you're paying somebody Y amount to do it, when there is a script that can do it for you, a prompt that you can write instead. And I think naturally kind of digital content creators and, dare I say it, old school journalists are the cynics in this space.
So is that a lack of willingness to adopt and embrace tools? That's because you talk about the more senior people. Is it, well, actually they are not going to embrace this, they're not going to be willing to adopt these tools and do things the way we want to? Or is it a case of it's just an opportunity for, well, actually we don't need their skills and we'll just employ someone and pay them less money to do not the same job but to do the equivalent job?
I think it's probably a bit of both, dependent on the individual. I don't want to stand here and say that all senior people in digital content dislike AI and are stick in the mud old school journalists. But I do think that when you've been working in this space for this long and you have seen the changes over different periods of time, the great pivot to video of 2012, which turned out to just be Facebook lying to us all. There's, I think, also a feeling right now that Google is lying to us all, but Google holds so many cards in this space that even if they are, that's going to affect jobs and that's going to affect people's ability to do stuff. We're told that if we have this EEAT, this authority trust experience, that we're going to rank highest in Google, yet the things that are ranking high are quite often assisted by or generated by AI, or even bigger than that. You can still be number one in Google, but because of how much Google's now putting on the page, often generated by AI, you're getting less traffic to that content. Therefore, obviously, the CEOs, the COOs, and etc. are having to say, well, you need to do more, because this time 2 years ago, your job was resulting in this, and now it's resulting in a lot less than that, but we're still paying you the same amount. It's a difficult situation.
Yeah, so part of it is just this massive proliferation of content that we're seeing as well, where it's just so easy to produce so much content now that it's kind of hard to get people's attention, and you're getting out competed, I guess.
Yeah, and I also think that consumers, especially the younger generations, those led specifically by consuming more video and less written content, shorter attention spans, they're more used to accepting a certain level. I always use TikTok as an example. I find it really strange as somebody in my midlife, let's say, that on TikTok, people seem to prefer, and videos tend to surface higher, that use that AI-generated voiceover rather than what I would do as someone who's trained in broadcast, which would be to record a beautiful voiceover and get the right person for the job. But people are either willing to accept that or actually like it, or maybe it's just that they've grown up with it in the last few years.
As I feel like they think that's what a professional video sounds like, and a video with a person speaking is kind of more amateur, whereas actually you could argue it's sort of like the production of food products, where the person speaking is the artisanal product and the mass produced one, it's this idea that the mass produced one is actually better. it's just strange. I mean, well, it's strange for us. Maybe, like you say, if you've grown up with it, that's what's normal to you, and therefore that's what you perceive as being, that's what a good quality video looks like or sounds like. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think there's a real dichotomy in terms of the advice that publishers are being given from various sources in terms of what is the sort of template and the quality you would want for something like a video, in terms of, we get told it needs to be authentic, but it needs to look polished. It needs to be researched, but it needs to be produced in 15 minutes. I've worked on for titles that have been asking people to publish between 8 and 10 articles a day, and I've worked on others that have allowed us 2 days to produce something much more complex. And I can't tell you which one of those is best, but I can tell you that an AI can do it quicker than me, whichever one of those it is.
With these particular redundancies or cuts that you've seen in your organisation, but also if you've got examples from others, are the references to AI at all? I mean, is it being referenced? Is it being implied, or is there simply no mention of it at all?
In my experience, the references to AI are less in this is the reason we're making these cuts, and more in the roles that are being recruited as a result of those cuts, whether that's a more junior position replacing a more senior one. Obviously, if you do a redundancy, you can't just replace that person, but you can shift the skill sets around the business. These digital publications that are making people redundant are often hiring in other areas. And I think that's the thing, is they might be hiring in an area that is more focused on harnessing and utilising, and
presumably
AI.
hiring less headcount overall than cutting.
Yeah, and not replacing people who go, a journalist who's been somewhere for 40 years is leaving, and they're not being replaced like for like. They might be being replaced with a junior person who has social and AI experience, for example.
It's interesting because I was speaking to a friend of mine who he's a software developer, and I was asking him if he's worried about his job, and he said no, but I'm really worried for any junior developers wanting to enter the market, because it feels like as a software developer, I think everyone's probably on the ball with respect to AI, and actually the jobs that are getting replaced are the entry-level jobs where it can write entry-level code very easily, but you need someone who understands code to read over it and make sure it's okay and just fact check it and whatever. It feels like it's kind of the opposite way around. I mean, jobs have still been impacted, but it's kind of the other way around, which is interesting.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the case. Yeah, because a junior writer can come in with probably a lot more digital experience and understanding of the market and how it works now, especially in certain topic areas, versus somebody who's been doing it for a long time but is perhaps weighed down with all of the changes and things that they've experienced along the way, probably used to speaking up a little bit more against things. Yeah.
So as a personal question, do you feel for yourself and for people in your position that it's a case of, well, I need to find an organisation that still shares my journalistic beliefs and values, or is it, okay, now it's time for me to retrain or move into a different area?
I think it's probably closer to the second one. I think I in the position I'm in now, I do not think that I will go into a similar job to what I've been doing at a different publication. I don't think those jobs really exist anymore in the way that they do. I think that what people in my position are looking at is either retraining in something completely different, or looking at ways of training and learning to use these new tools and stuff on our own terms rather than under the
So as a freelancer in a sense, or
potentially, yeah. I mean, a lot of people in journalism will follow a track where they work at publications for a certain amount of time and then go freelance, because you build up your contacts and you develop that reputation, especially online. Your kind of Google history of things that you've written and so on, which allows you to do that. So that's kind of like a natural thing that's always existed, particularly, I have to say, with women who become parents as well. That's a way of doing things to be more flexible for your family as well. But I think you have to move with the times. Anyone working in digital will be doing that anyway. But I do think that AI is the scariest thing that's come along in a long time.
Well, in history, potentially.
Yeah.
In human history. Yeah.
in a very long time. So just out of interest, I mean, before we move on, I guess, just out of interest, like, have you started using AI? Have you started employing it? Like, where do you think it fits in for you? Like, if you were to be a freelance journalist, for example, where does it fit in for you in terms of your process?
So I played around with it in what I would say is quite a cautious way. I think to start off with, it would be using it to help me with kind of basic processes and things. Thinking of examples I've done, I had a list that had bullet points and I needed it without bullet points. I asked ChatGPT to do that for me. It's really, really basic things like that. I've also tried to use ChatGPT to give me social captions and to give me examples of like putting in a 10 of the best and getting it to make recommendations. Those kind of things are not at the level that I would expect them to, they're not as good as what I would get from a junior writer. So that area's got some movement, but there are a lot of businesses that are starting with that now. They're saying, write your draft with a chatbot and then edit it with ChatGPT even, and then edit it. I've not found that helpful. I would rather just write it from scratch. But I think that's where I need to be moving towards, is like, how can I be using those tools?
So I think that's a really interesting point, because it feels like, and I don't want to sound patronizing, but you're at that kind of point where there's I don't want to be like that because that's not the way I do things. And do you know what? I've kind of got no choice but to embrace this. Because I think that, for a lot of people, I'd probably include myself in this in a way. I'd be quite happy if it went back in the box and it'd never been invented. I think there was so many great things, but if it wasn't here and we could carry on, everybody finds change difficult. I think there are a lot of people who are actually fully aware of the need to embrace and to understand AI and are, and I'm not saying you're in this space because I don't think you are, but are keeping their head in the sand because they just don't want to. Once they start looking at it, it's going to make them realize how much they need to use it. You see that the people who are worried about their jobs are the people who are using tools, not the people who are not using them. The more you use them, the more you start to fear, because the more you understand how much it can do. I think that idea of kind of embracing it sort of gently, that's where most people are. And I think now kind of reaching that point of, do you know what, I'm going to have to start embracing this. And Chris, who was on the translation episode, was a great example of, he was kind of saying, well, no, I don't actually need it that much. And, actually the things that I do, and then basically said, well, I'm actually leaving the industry. So, there is, I think in a lot of people, there's a kind of cognitive dissonance going on in a lot of our heads at the moment about, how much we want to do this and how much we want to embrace it. And then the point that you realize, I've got to do it. And as much as you might not want to, that's the direction that we are inevitably headed with every job, to be honest. It's just a matter of how much, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think, the way I look at it is I need to look at the spaces where an AI cannot have the lived experience. It cannot test a product. It cannot go on a holiday. It cannot have a lived experience of, something physical. And those are the spaces where you're always going to need the experience. The problem is it's going to get better and better and better and better at pretending that it did.
You get me
making people believe.
You get me a really good example, which is when you're talking about, in an area that you'd worked, when it's sort of products for kids, and you'd need to be a parent to understand some of the intricacies of why something would be important and whether AI can ever, be able to do that. Because even if there's that amount of training data, at some point the training data is all being created by AI anyway, and it gets murky and dirty and messy, and it's just being trained on secondhand information, but you don't have that lived experience. With all of this stuff, I don't like to say never, because I don't think we can predict that AI can never do this. I think it may be able to do everything and think in every way at some point, but in the foreseeable future, it's difficult for someone who hasn't got kids to be able to understand some of the things that a parent needs to understand. So it would presumably be even more difficult for something which is not able to have children to understand.
Yeah, so you could ask MidJourney, for example, to give you a picture of a baby in a crib, and it would give you a lovely picture of a baby in the crib, but that baby would probably have teddies surrounding it and crib bumpers and all these things that an expert in that field would know are not recommended, and the safety would be, don't have those in a photograph. You could ask it to give you a picture of a child on a bike, and the child would be the wrong age for the bike, they wouldn't be wearing a helmet. This is tiny little minutiae.
These are good examples.
But it's the kind of thing that as a senior person or somebody who's got lived experience or whatever it is spots, and that's the benefit of them, and that's why they earn the serious money, and that's what's going to disappear. But I guess you just need to train that AI to look for that. There's always an answer. Terrifyingly.
Yeah, there is potentially always an answer. But going back to something you said earlier on, and the fact that you're going to have to now start to use ChatGPT and AI tools or other AI sort of bots, like that kind of worries me. Again, just going back, like because if everyone starts doing that, then surely all the content's going to converge to becoming quite generic and all sort of pretty much it all comes from the same starting point, right? So you might do you might put some edits on it, and the way you edit it might be slightly different. But people are lazy, and so you're going to get a lot of just AI regurgitated stuff.
Yeah, and if we're in a position where trained writers, copywriters, journalists, whatever they are, cannot make a living doing that, eventually the AIs are going to run out of stuff that is from lived, learned, researched experience to train itself on.
Everything's going to sound the same.
Yeah, and that might work in some spaces where the information never changes. Yeah. But what about product recommendations? There are products coming onto the market every day that are brand new. Your top 10 air fryers is not going to be the same in 3 years, but if people are not able to test them in a lab at Which or something, there's not going to be that independent advice. It'll all be based on user reviews. We've all seen what user reviews
tasting
look
the food
like.
that comes out of the air fryer, because presumably we're a long way off an AI being able to actually taste and carry out a taste test on the food, right? I mean, the lab bit, in a way, you could see quite easy an AI could be able to run the data from a lab, but how does it run the taste test? How does it, on a restaurant review, how does it go and taste the food in a restaurant? You need people to create, like you say, to create the data. I mean, it only exists with three things. The AI needs the AI triad, which is compute, algorithm, and data. It needs data, and it needs good data. That's the important thing. You put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. So maybe there's a bit of hope there.
Well, AI recipes are hilarious. I'm thinking about doing that with something like weaning, where it's children as well. I saw an example the other day. I think it was shared on Instagram from one of these funny accounts like I am 30AF, which was somebody had asked the Google AI search how to stop cheese falling off a pizza. And one of the recommendations was put some non-toxic glue into your sauce. So people creating recipes for, whether it's a cooking blog or a magazine or whatever, probably are slightly less worried than other people in this space, but it will catch up.
That's a great way to end the interview, I think. So Jimmy, shall we have a chat about where we think this is heading, or whether we think there's anything that is kind of, in the offing in the next few months in terms of the impact on jobs based on what we've seen and read over the last week or so?
Yeah, so for me, I think it's definitely heading towards the Golden Gate Bridge, which is 2,737 meters, by the way, in case anyone didn't know. Oh, sorry. Sorry, you're asking Jimmy.
Let me put you back into normal mode, Jimmy.
Okay. Yeah, so I think to sum up, like I think we're gonna see this more and more as we talked about a little bit earlier on. I think this is the sort of story that we're starting to see more now, and that's why we wanted to do this episode and this interview, because there's been a number of stories which, again, they relate directly back to AI now, rather than just being, there's jobs being lost, and then there's also stories about AI in the news. You gave the BT and the IBM examples. We've got the interview we did on the podcast. We've got a couple of specific examples that we cited in this episode. So it just feels to me that this is something to continue to keep an eye on, and I think that I do think there's going to be more and more of this in the near future.
I want to come at it from the kind of legislation and regulatory angle, because obviously with the elections we've got this year in the UK, India, the US, I mean, just to name three, I think that's holding back the ability of a lot of the world to really put in legislation. But there's a lot more things happening than you would think. So I was actually last week I was studying sort of governance and legislation globally. So looking, outside of just the US and the UK. So we talked before about the EU has got the AI Act. There's a lot of stuff going on in China. There's not a piece of kind of overarching legislation at the moment. And in the US as well, Joe Biden's presidential, executive order that came out last year. There's a lot of stuff in the background, but it doesn't really have any teeth to it yet. And I guess my hope is that once we have elections out of the way, and if we get, the amount of kind of job losses over the next few months that we think there could potentially be, and people really start to put two and two together, a lot of this legislation, a lot of it actually is about the protection of jobs and the protection of rights and the protection of people's personal information. And I don't know how it will happen. And I think I've always said, I think it will be too late for a lot of people. It will be very reactive. But I do think we're reaching a point where governments are going to have to start putting in place ways, because let's face it, private industry is going to see this as a way to generate more revenue. And as long as we have the system we have, where you have to prioritize shareholders, we're not going to see the majority of companies, I'm not going to say everybody, but the majority of companies take this as something that they need to look at. Now, we've seen that some companies, particularly in the tech space, want to do retraining and want to help their staff. But let's be honest, for most companies, it's going to be about cost saving. So it's going to be governments that need to put stuff in place.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm letting people into the back room here on our thought process a little bit, but I actually think we should do an episode in the near future on, like, a specific episode on regulation, because I think there's a lot to talk about there, and comparing and contrasting different countries as well and how they're approaching things, the EU, USA. You mentioned China. I don't have all the detail in front of me today, hence the need to do an episode and do some research, but I know that some of the stuff that China has been looking to implement is actually pretty progressive, especially in terms of, I mean, it's a big country with 1.6 billion, 1.7 billion people. So they're obviously really worried about, unemployment and the workforce. And there's actually some stuff in the Chinese regulation, quite a lot of really progressive stuff around protecting workers' rights and protecting rights from AI. So that's just one example, but I think, and obviously you've given the example in the US, and the EU are catching up now as well. So I think it would be worth a sort of longer conversation around this, maybe in the near future.
And there's a couple of things that have happened in the last couple of weeks as well. So Geoffrey Hinton, who is often called the godfather of AI. I mean, there's quite a few people who are called the godfather of AI. He's one of them. He left Google DeepMind because he was, worried about the direction that things went. But he apparently has told Rishi Sunak, maybe this is why Rishi Sunak decided to step down and call an election, but he's told him that the UK needs to be introducing a universal basic income now, not waiting, but doing it now. And then Elon Musk has been talking also to Rishi Sunak. I don't know why they're all talking to Rishi Sunak, but apparently they are. So he has talked about this thing called universal high income. And he told Rishi Sunak, people can have a job if they want, a kind of for personal satisfaction, but AI at some point is going to be able to do everything. There's this universal high income, which is apparently sort of superior to universal basic income, which he describes as being something of a leveler. And I guess in some way, without having an exact description, it's about using the benefits of artificial intelligence and, work on the basis that they're doing everything and they're creating an endless supply of goods and services and generating loads and loads of whatever capital looks like, about spreading that around across people, and it not being, universal basic income is essentially enough for you to get by. A universal high income would theoretically be enough for everybody to have a high standard of living. So it's unusual for Elon Musk to give something that makes me feel optimistic. But if this was possible, it would be potentially closer to our utopia, at least, than our dystopia.
Yeah, I think that, so. I've had a quick look at universal high income. I mean, it's a nice aspiration. I think personally, I think a better social option to begin with might be to kind of bring everyone out of poverty globally first, rather than focusing on everyone having a high standard of living, because a significant amount of the world is not even there yet. So that would be, if I was in charge, I'd probably do that first. And I think this is where, in terms of that utopia conversation, there is a potential for huge growth and economic gain off the back of some of the stuff that AI can do. Just in terms of that, it'll be much cheaper, it'll be much faster, it'll work around the clock 24 hours, as we've discussed before. So there is the potential to generate a lot of growth and then redistribute that growth, and actually for everyone to benefit from it. But I just hope that's the case.
I just want to finish off today with a recommendation for people, and I'll also put this in the notes on the podcast. So it's a video that's titled "How You Will Lose Your Job to AI" by Lazy Owl on YouTube, which sounds quite depressing. It's 11 minutes long, and it basically talks through the cycle of what jobs will be replaced, how they'll be replaced, how society will change. There's a nice little cartoon in the background. Eventually we get to a UBI and a kind of temporary utopia, and then people's minds are filled with endless amounts of hedonism. And then there are three choices. Humans either continue to become more imbecilic and stupid and useless, or they rebel and AI needs to take us all out of our misery. Or the third option, and this is the preferred option, and the one that was the first time that I've seen this, was that eventually humans become active participants again in a world, but a world that's controlled by AI. But in a world that's controlled by AI. And in this world, the AI that's in control gives us just about enough in terms of jobs, gives us just about enough in terms of jobs and things to do to keep us useful and motivated. And basically our purpose is to serve the AI, but we don't feel like that because we're doing things again. It's got jobs that we enjoy doing. We find a kind of equilibrium, and AI is in control, but we're happy to live in that world. So watch that video, because it will leave you with, I think, a slightly hopeful view or vision of what might come to pass.
That sounds to me like example 1 was WALL-E, example 2 was a bit like Terminator, and example 3 was the Ian M. Banks books, the culture novels.
Well, no, it actually, I think it even might mention those books. I think it might mention the books at the beginning of the video. So yeah, you're exactly right. All right. Thanks, Jimmy.
Thanks.
We'll be back next week. We don't know what we'll be doing, so I won't try and announce it, but we'll be back with a new episode next week. Hope this one was useful. And as always, please make sure to subscribe, pass it on to your friends, and enjoy the outro track. So have a good week, everyone.
Conquered the news today, it's looking kind of bleak. He's taking jobs every day of the week. Graphic designers, coders too, copywriters, we're all feeling blue. But hey, don't worry, there's a twist to the tale. Not all jobs are heading down the AI trail. Funeral directors gotta work, it's a bit unique. Saying goodbye, finding solace we see. Machines doing art, coding in a click. Some jobs, they're here to stick. And if tech's too much, well, here's a fun twist. You can join the Amish, live the simple bliss. So as we cross life's bridges, just like